The Rocky Ford Museum. My name's Edward Vela. I am from La Junta, born and raised there, and we're here to talk about the Santa Fe Railway from Dodge City, Kansas, all the way through to La Junta and up the valley towards Pueblo a little bit. This is my first trek as a presenter. I want to thank Rob for putting me down as a historian there, but I'm not a full-fledged historian. I'm just one guy who loved living in the southeast Colorado area. And of course, I'm never going to leave it. From cradle to grave, I'm going to be here. But as I was saying earlier, this is my first trek into it, and I worked at, before I came working for the railroad, which I worked for 12 years, I was with NIBCO, manufacturing facility there. I don't know how many of you have heard of that. But following that, I went to the railroad and then went to work in the VA for 20 years, and I retired there. I also went to work for the city of La Junta as a councilman, and I retired there also, just recently in November. But what really enthused me about it is I have been a historical buff since I was 8 or 9 years old, and I started out reading the newspaper. Some of you may recall reading that article by Drew Pearson, Washington Merry-Go-Round. That was my favorite. My mom would order the newspaper for me every day. We subscribed to it, and the first thing I ran to when I got home was a newspaper. And I read it, and I read all of it from front to rear. So that's where I really became interested in public service and history and all these other good things that come when you're born and raised in a small town, small rural town like La Junta. I'd like to say, first of all, that if you haven't been to the La Junta Otero Museum, you should go there, because that's quite a museum. They got a lot of history, not just of La Junta, but Otero County, and that includes Rocky Ford. And what I like about La Junta's museum is they're really situated where they got a lot of pictures, a lot of artifacts, a lot of things about the railroad. They got a lot of things about the town. It's just really great. And I think once you get done visiting the Otero Museum, you should come here to the Rocky Ford Museum, because everything they have here complements what has happened in La Junta, and more in some cases, because you will enjoy both facilities, the Otero Museum and the Rocky Ford Museum. And of course, both places don't charge you a thing, but they sure welcome donations. It's always good to donate to these free things, because we want to sustain them. As you know, they talk about history of each city or a particular organization, like we're going to talk about tonight. And one old saw that used to intrigue me and keep me going all the time was, those who know not history oft tend to repeat it. And I don't know where in today's world if that's true anymore, because it's getting more wild and so forth. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, most commonly called by most people here in the valley, is the Santa Fe. And they had their humble beginnings in 1860 and have existed for 140 years. That would take it up from 1860 to the middle 1990s. And it ended in the 1996, I believe, when they merged with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. That's what it was called after. And it was organized initially at Atchison, Kansas, and was intent there was to hookup between Atchison and Topeka cities, and then ran to their intent was ultimately to go to the Santa Fe Comprehensive Trade Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hence the name always stuck with it. To get there, the Santa Fe Railroad basically followed the Santa Fe Trail, which was started in 1821. As a matter of fact, 3 years ago, they just had the 200th anniversary of the Santa Fe Trail, and they celebrated that at Bent's Fort. There was so many people there. The loft over there at the Bent's Fort was kind of softened up a little bit, and now they've closed out that upper level of Bent's Fort. But I'm just kidding about that. But that's the reason they give. And at least I know that they're giving some areas of concern there, and they're taking care of them. The founder of the railroad was Colonel C.K. Holiday, one of the most influential men, statesmen rather, of eastern Kansas, who was a member of the Territorial Senate of Kansas. And he helped write the charter in 1859 and secure its passage through the territory of Kansas. And this was all done on private funding. The other railroads that you all probably remember are from Promontory, Utah, west, and Promontory, Utah, east. That was the first transcontinental railroad. They got there before the Santa Fe was able to clear up to California, but they did all their success based on grants. The Santa Fe was all private money, and the grants they only got was from the United States Congress, which gave them, if you meet a certain area of land and progress there with rails, you're going to get all this land, millions of acres. By the time the railroad got done with their 13,000 acres, 13,000 miles of track, which go from Chicago all the way down to La Junta, down to Albuquerque, Los Angeles, and up to San Francisco. They also go from they used to go all from Pueblo to La Junta, and I'm talking passenger rail there. But that was the proud thing about Santa Fe. They were the first ones to do it on private enterprise. Some people believe also that the Santa Fe Trail began in Franklin, Missouri, and then on west to Independence. And some say that was the beginning of the Santa Fe Railroad's trail to get to Santa Fe, New Mexico. But in fact, at Independence, Missouri, it's where the breaking point was. In other words, people wanted to go to Oregon, Washington State. That was known as the Oregon Trail. But both trails met at Independence, Missouri, and they took off to the Oregon Trail. And those that wanted to go to the Santa Fe Trail, they went there that way, but they both met. And needless to say, everybody was competing for the products and the supplies they would need to make the long, arduous trip by wagon to those areas. But as the rails came in, they recognized that as the rails come in, the land value went up, because of Santa Fe and all the other railroads that were competing. Anytime you got into a town, they were set up to expand. And that expansion led to new economies, new goods and services, new ways to move your goods. The farmers and ranchers and the business people had many ways by which they could move their goods either east or west. the first recognized division at the Santa Fe Railroads, which spelled success and growth of the railroad, was in Dodge City, Kansas. This track expansion reached the Kansas-Colorado state line in 1873. Many little depots sprung up between Dodge City and Colorado state line. They were spaced between 30 and sometimes 60 miles apart. Garden City, Kansas really proliferated in southwest Kansas. They were almost on the heels of threatening Dodge City as a more populous area for the railroad. Conversely, that effort to space the depots continued through Colorado and into New Mexico, and it was mainly to have necessary telegraph communication of train movement perfect in order to avoid wrecks and keep communications between the stations along the line. Because if you didn't have that, you wouldn't have any paying customers to ride the rails, and you wouldn't have trains moving up very fast, because you'd have a lot of train wrecks, or you'd have two trains meeting up on the same rail and nobody to take a siding. So that's what the importance of the telegraph station was. And the gentlemen that were at the depots, they were all telegraphers, every single one of them. They were sharp. I have a little telegraph machine over here, and it'll show you, this one here was run by springs, and it still works today because it's generated by spring. And this runs, believe it or not, wireless too. So it's 20th century type stuff. This does not relieve the 19th century. It was not available here. The other method was this telephone. This is a 1913 telephone. I'm trying to find batteries for it. And it's a Western Electric type phone. Perhaps some of you have seen them. And I know a lot of you in here are not old enough to recognize this. This is a really great means of communication. And over here I have some late model, well, 1970s stuff. Santa Fe coffee cup. And over here is the last year Santa Fe put this out. The last year that Santa Fe ran passengers. This was 1971. And Amtrak took over then, and they're still running it today. Matter of fact, we almost lost it several years ago, but the city of La Junta, city manager Rick Klein, teamed up with a whole bunch of guys from Kansas City all the way down to Albuquerque and saved the super chief. And notice that it was saved super chief because when the railroads first came through here, they had a lot of trouble with Indians. And it wasn't until the Indians became good people, understanding, that they named one of the trains, which happens to run through La Junta and from Garden City, Dodge City, Chicago, all the way to LA, Super Chief. And that was very pleasing to them. Over here, I have, this is the kerosene lamp that brakemen used to flag the, not to flag, but signal the trains. This would be for them to get ready to stop, and then they'd have the conductors have them, and I forget what their motions were that they made to signal the steam locomotive or diesel locomotive trains about what their situation is, whether they have to wait a certain place, or in fact, if there was a train order. A train order, there was kind of like a wishbone. I know because I did a lot of them in the country, on the Manor District, and even between Dodge you would have a wishbone stick, and the wishbone, there'd be a string in the middle, and there'd be a piece of paper you'd tie on there, and that would be a train order. And right now they call them track warrants because technology took over. Technology is now radio, and they don't need the locals anymore. Everything is done either in Chicago or Dallas. I'm not sure which one it is now. But anyway, when I was in Syracuse, Kansas, working for the agent there that was went on vacation, I had to type them out, no mistakes, absolutely no mistakes. And you had to read it back to the dispatcher, word for word, period for period, no errors. And then hang it out there sometime, and you had to get there, you had to get outside, climb the train order ladder, so to speak, and put your wishbone out there, and the conductor or a brakeman would be on the caboose, and he'd snatch it out like that. He'd just go, and the train would keep on going. And that was fun sometimes. And then other times they didn't get it, well, you'd have to call them on the radio and tell them what it read. And they would have to copy it after you having copied it. And it was fun. It was challenging. And I learned a lot being out there. And then over here, I have tie nails. The earliest one from 1901. These went into ties to tell management, usually the track gang superformans, hey, this railroad tie was put in 1901. This one here was put in during the war, 1944. And they quit using these in 1969. Because I guess the creosote in the ties, which you never want to get on your coat, by the way, was being real sufficient. But I'm just kidding on that end too. But anyway, that was one reason that the numbers were put in. Even some of the old ties that we have on off mainline track service, you may find some on there too. If you do, keep them, because somebody may want them for their selves as a keepsake. Maybe Granddad really worked out at the railroad, and he liked it, or your dad did, or somebody in the family. Santa Fe was also very, very well versed in safety. Santa Fe really worked. As a matter of fact, I know Adrian's grandfather, Ted, he was a dispatcher.
Yeah.
What was his last name?
Lewis.
Ted Lewis, yeah. He was a great dispatcher, and he was a good guy. I really loved him. And he taught me a lot, and I got to see him once in a while whenever I'd go to the superintendent's office where the dispatch was. And those dispatchers had a hard job because they had to do all the math. And now, today, they don't need dispatchers. Everything is technologically correct. Everything's figured out. And that to me was really basically the beginning of the new AI, which means artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, that's right. It's coming out. And the railroad was really high on safety, especially on the track gangs and the train crews and the guys that worked in the yard. They would give out little things here, like this one here. Make safety first on the Colorado Division. They gave out a lot of these pocket knives and such, and even wristwatches. I still got my wristwatch that I had when I worked there back in the 80s. And like I said, I was working there in the 80s when they took off the telegraphers and I had to go around, and so did a lot of other clerks. I worked from La Junta to Denver, all the stations in between, most of them. I worked from La Junta to Albuquerque, from La Junta to Boise City, Oklahoma, and from La Junta to Dodge City. And that was called extra board work. And a lot of my job was to go help them telegraphers, get used to these new CRTs, cathode ray tubes, because they had everything done for them. Well, these guys were 55, 60 years old, and they were telegraphers. There wasn't anything going to change it. Not even that one on the end there that we showed a while ago. That one was not going to be my future, said those old telegraphers. And I never understood telegraphy. I never learned it. I didn't care to learn it because I was learning something new with the CRTs. And the Santa Fe sent us out there, and we helped those guys learn how to do the CRTs. And they weren't going for it. They said, yeah, I know everything. You did good, get out of here, kid. And as soon as a couple months later, they grew frustrated with it. And like the rest of us who were learning in the early days, there were some days you could just grab it and throw it out the window. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to jump on it and step on it and kick it in, because they were not going to do that. There was nothing like telegraphy to these guys that I met. And I could still name a whole bunch of them, because they were all swell guys. They were great guys. And as soon as them guys retired, most of them retired at 55, 60 years old. When they retired, they closed the stations. All those little 30-mile from Dodge City stations and wherever, they didn't need them anymore, because the shippers, which was mostly grain, and cattle weren't, I didn't ship any cattle because cattle were being trucked out by then. They took over the railroad's business. And the railroad really didn't want it anymore because cattle had to be stopped every 30 miles, I think, to be fed, watered, and, get that train and that cooped up space out of their way, because the trains didn't go as fast as their semis do now. But anyway, the rails had all these telegraphers quitting, and as they quit, they closed the stations. Because when one guy quit, I said, "Oh boy, I'm going to get me a permanent job. I'm going to move here to Garden City or Pierceville, Kansas, or Sublette, Kansas, or even Boise City, wherever there was closing." They closed the stations, and by the time we got all that done, I was out of a job because they didn't need me. They needed me, but I didn't have the seniority to hold on to a job. Seniority, the rail unions were very good, and they were very strong union, and I believe they still are today. And I was a union rep too for the clerks, Brotherhood of Railway, Airline, and Steamship Clerks. And my responsibility was, just like I mentioned earlier, all those stations, from here to Colorado Springs, down to Bernalillo, New Mexico. All those clerks, they were call me and say, "I'm treated unfairly," or "we need this and that." Different type of union stuff. And after I took a buyout, I went to work for the VA at the VA hospital. But I would never ever forget my experience at the Santa Fe Railroad. And the freight supported for the traveling public, farmers and ranchers, as their goods were shipped east and west. Moreover, travelers needed time to plan. While these satellite stations were established, cities sprung up. I have a map here of the Arkansas Valley. This one here is the 1876 timetable. This is very old, very sensitive, and you guys can look at it sometime, and it shows you from Topeka all the way down through to La Junta and down through Albuquerque, and ultimately before Albuquerque, Santa Fe. Santa Fe, New Mexico, because it was the capital of New Mexico. And Santa Fe has been around since almost the same time as dirt, because people had to have trade and see what other goods are coming in and get new ideas and marketing ideas, and that's exactly what they did when they got to Santa Fe. The ATSF jobs in real estate bolstered each town's economy and stability. Santa Fe Railroad was good at establishing sound business practices in all their dealings, and that was mostly done in real estate too. The Santa Fe continued after Kansas, and they went west to La Junta and on to Pueblo by 1876. Of course, some guys had already been here earlier, but it was 1876 that the Colorado border, that Native American and Spanish names of locations took hold. Names of such stations such as Cano, Granada, Las Animas, La Junta, Apixapa, Manzanola, and more from LJ, La Junta to Santa Fe, New Mexico. There was even one at Satana, Kansas. Satana was a chief, an Indian chief, and he was there at Satana on the Manor District, between Dodge City and Boise City. And I worked that station, and there was one hotel there, I remember that. And I went there, well, we're full, okay, I'll sleep in the depot. That was fun too. There was even, in the early 1900s, Santa Fe purchased the Sugar Beet Railroad when a dispute arose. How many of you went to see that? What's his name?
Chuck Hannigan.
Chuck Hannigan. He went, he was doing this at the Smithsonian exhibit at the college. And he said it got so bad there between the owners and the shippers and the farmers that Santa Fe was asked to take over the railroad there. And it was called, Santa Fe called it the Arkansas Valley District, because it started over there in Swink and ran clear to Hawley. And they picked up sugar beets and all kinds of other freight that they shipped that was needed. Back then, sugar beets was a big thing because everybody had to have sugar, and sugar was on our way to doing good things until, what, 1950s? Something happened down in the Caribbean that we started getting all our sugar from the countries, small countries in the Caribbean area. Anyway, but the sheriff was called in, and they, as they said in at that deal at the college, that it got so hostile. The sheriff was even scared with his posse that he had there. He was going to maintain order. That's how bad it get. And back then, every town basically had their own sugar beet factory where they produced sugar, believe it or not. And I couldn't see the sense of that, but I'm telling you that what they was reporting, they had sugar beets coming out of their ears. So every town had all these people working, and they had sugar beets to pull out, process, get those sugar bags out, and make it really great. But many new railroad jobs came out of that too. many new railroad jobs because of the various merchandise, including beef, fresh fruits, veggies, U.S. mail, furniture, and so forth. There was too many to list. At each depot, there were around 5 to 10 people employed. La Junta was and still is the junction for all the current railroad stuff. A lot of coal trains go through here now. Also, the Santa Fe, established in La Junta, Santa Fe Trail Transportation. That was the company that took over, the freight cars would come in with furniture, clothing, and what else, and they would take it out of the rail cars, put it on the dock. The Santa Fe Trail trucks would come in, pick them up, load them up, take them on out to various businesses around the valley, and maybe even homes. That was a pretty good business until competition took it out. So, also during the La Junta, which was still the junction, as I said, had 1,500 to 2,000 jobs there at one time. And I mean, they had a job for just about anything you had needed to run a successful business. They had coach cleaners, they had Santa Fe Trail people, they had ice house, which men would take care of the cars that come in and required ice, because the fruit and veggies and all that would come from California and Arizona, and they'd move right through there and take it right to the East Coast, because the East Coast was loving the food produced out in the West. And also a side thing for the railroad was creation of the Harvey houses. I'm sure many of you have heard those from your parents. And the Harvey houses employed good workers. They had to be their best, particularly the Harvey House girls. They had to be of excellent character, excellent character, kind, efficient, and very good looking, because they'd only last there a year if they were really good lookers. Because guess what? The guys that come through, they'd marry them away, and off they went to wherever they desired. But there's still a few Harvey House women that worked at the Harvey House in La Junta during the war and after, because the La Junta Harvey House was torn down in the late 50s, I believe. And the building that you see there now for Amtrak, that used to be the railroad depot too. La Junta was also selected as the Santa Fe Division headquarters, and their first division headquarters was set up around where the new Abba store is, where you get your eyes examined. Across the highway from there north is where the initial Colorado Division headquarters was. And that ran from La Junta all the way to the Colorado border, on up through Denver, and I believe down to Las Vegas. Once you got to Las Vegas, that was another division, from Las Vegas to Albuquerque. And those divisions were pretty powerful. Telegraphers were found at all the Santa Fe depots, including those south of La Junta. And those, they were important with communication for the trains, because they had a big old train wreck west of La Junta back in 1920s, I believe. And I'm not sure what the result of that was, but it was quite a crash, and I can't recall what I read about that. But if you want to know, go to La Junta Otero Museum. You'll find the answer there. And if you don't find it there, try here. Rob might have it. He hasn't had a chance to get through them yet, probably. Okay, and then the Santa Fe division office, it was very efficient and effective, and Santa Fe built a new division office at 4th and Santa Fe on the southwest corner of 4th and Santa Fe, and it still stands today. And if you go in that building and you look at it, as I once mopped the floors in there when I was working, those are immaculate. They're spared no expense for any Santa Fe building. As a matter of fact, all the depots were very well designed and built. They had the best lumber, and the buildings were so good that, in fact, I should have brought some water. The buildings were so good that they brought the best lumber and everything else to the Adrian. He's just like his grandpa Ted. Saved me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
They spared no expense in building those buildings. And once the railroads started hitting the towns, there was no doubt that the increase in land values was going up because you had rails. That was an access of transportation. So they really appreciated that. The railroad executives were the ones that chose the town sites, and they laid out the squared streets and often ran their tracks down the middle to create middle of the area they had platted, and they created a right side, which to them meant respectable businesses and so forth, and they created a wrong side with saloons and bordellos, because that was necessary evil, I guess. The depots were placed in the center of each town, and they were very well constructed. As a matter of fact, they are so constructed that a lot of former railroad employees and non-employees, they would buy these little depots out in the countryside or railroad buildings, and they brought them back to town, and they made their own homes out of it. A good example of that is, how many of you remember the Hickory House out on East La Junta on 3rd Street? Behind there, you'll find 3 or 4 depots that Dale Allred, who was the original owner of the Hickory House, he brought those back, refurbished them, made a home out of them. And it's so nice. They still look good today because they really took care of their business. Lastly, I'd like to say the Santa Fe passenger service was discontinued in 1971, as I showed you with this. And the Super Chief in 71, that was to mark the decline of Santa Fe's people movement. But Amtrak operates now from Chicago to LA and San Francisco, LA to San Francisco in California. The passenger train was a name coming from Amtrak to the Santa Fe Railroad in honor of a Native American, and there is Native American Indian chief. Today, there's talk of creating a hotshot train from La Junta to Pueblo. In other words, if you live in Fowler, you can go to Pueblo, come to La Junta, and go back. Or you can come to La Junta and go straight to Pueblo and hook up with the, I forget what the main line is that's going to be set up. They got billions already set up for experimental from Fort Collins all the way down to the New Mexico line. Those are major traveling enhancements that the government's going to do for you.
The Front Range Rail Project.
Well, you know, back in the early days when...
The Front Range Rail Project?
Yeah, Front Range Rail Project. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The Front Range Rail Project is ongoing now, and there's a lot of talk to get that done. But La Junta to Pueblo nonstop is, in a sense, a copycat of what is currently going on now between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. They have a hot shot train runs straight through, no stopping, no picking up, unless we have some trouble. It runs from Albuquerque early in the morning, and it takes you to Santa Fe. You get off, go to your job, go shopping or whatever, and then it leaves at the end of the day when the workers get off, or to go back home to Albuquerque, because Santa Fe had quite a few jobs, a lot of shortages, and a lot of goods to sell, so they wanted to steal some from Albuquerque, and they take them down there and sell them out. But anyway, I don't know. I'm still not sure about what they're going to do between La Junta and here, because that takes away from everything that most La Juntans believe in. Shop local everything. So there's a whole lot of Santa Fe Railroad information to pass out, particularly here in the valley, because there's a lot of good stories, a lot of information. And I was hoping to put a slideshow together, but a lot of you have seen most of the pictures. So if anybody have any questions about anything, I'll try and answer them. Nope. Okay, you're welcome to come up here and look at this 1876 timetable, and it talks about all the beautiful things you can see in Colorado. This is what it's called. Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe. For 140 years, the Santa Fe existed before it merged. As a matter of fact, before they merged with the Burlington Northern, there were other railroads trying to steal the Santa Fe and having them merge with them, like Southern Pacific. That was almost a sure thing in 1992, or late 80s, I believe. Yeah, late 80s, and they never did it. But that's all I have. If you all don't have any questions, we'll do some more. Because Rob said, I'm not just going to ask you one time. I'm going to ask you several times to come over here and talk about the railroad, which I will. Here's a little Santa Fe lapel that I got from when I was working there. And I had two of them, but I wore one to church and on my suit coat, and these doggone things didn't fell off. But I had two of them. So,
Goodness.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Ed.
For doing this. And, like I said, this is my first time, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Just as a reminder, these things that are paper, they're very sensitive to the oils of your skin. So be very careful. Try not to touch them if you can help it, because I can see he doesn't really care. So, but I mean, they are very sensitive.
But you're welcome to come see this. This is an 1876 map. Timetable. Timetables were the same as you're having a.
So, Rob, are you going to have this on display this month for people that couldn't make it tonight?
I'd like to, but it's kind of up to Ed if he wants to lead the stuff. To observe. We do have a Harvey House menus down here and on display.
And you got some other cool stuff at the museum.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Very cool. From the Rocky Ford Museum, for Ed, Vela, and Rob, with your Southeast Colorado News, I'm Adrian Hart.